The other thing that this precipitation does is it allows the grapevines to grow longer into the season and larger than what we would consider to be an ideal growth stature on the vines. We talk as grape growers about the canopy of the vine. That's the leaf area of the vine. We produce vines that have much more leaf area than is really needed or desirable. Again, this aggravates our disease control issues. It also, we are increasingly finding that it can impart some herbaceous characters into the wines, and I won't go into the chemistry of that, but there are some compounds elaborated in leaves that end up in fruit that, or is synthesized in fruit as well, but degrades very slowly over time. And these compounds, if you have actively growing leaves, can degrade even slower, so some of it gets translated into the wine. You've probably, if you've tasted enough wines from this area, may have come across a wine, particularly a red wine, that you think, well, there's an herbaceousness to it, or a vegetative character to it. And that's often a result of the fact that we have these grapevines that don't know when to say stop in terms of growing. It's too much rainfall, fertile soils. We can grow good corn on some of these soils, but they're not really the best soils for growing grapevines. And that's, we can't do much about turning the water off, but what some of our more progressive growers are doing, and some of our research now is starting to look at, is how we can minimize the vine's ability to exploit that moisture. So we're looking at hillside plantings. You're seeing more and more vineyards going in now with that have rows up on a hillside. That allows for surface drainage of the water off the hill, less percolation of moisture into the soil when it rains, so consequently there's less moisture available to those vines during their growing season. We're also looking at using vegetation to our benefit in the vineyard. The vegetation, which might be considered weeds by some, would remove some of this excess moisture. They are competing with the vines for moisture. We just as soon go into the grasses and other cover crops that we grow in the vineyard, though, than be available to the vines. So there are some things that we can do in that regard. Let's come back and look at soils a little bit. There's a wide variety of soils that one can find in Maryland, in the principal grape growing areas of Maryland and Virginia. We're a long way, though, from identifying and defining how one particular soil type, whether it be a soil that originates from schist, or a soil that originates from limestone, or sandstone, or granite, or the other principal rocks, parent rocks that make up the soils of this area. We really are not at a point of saying that a particular soil origin defines a particular wine type. And I would challenge wine growers to give me evidence of that, because we do look for those kind of relationships. What we do know, though, about soil and how it has an impact on wine quality is really related to soil hydrology, or the water holding capacity of the soil. So again, here we're spending more time now looking for soils that perhaps don't provide the surplus of moisture to the vines that results in this excessive vegetative growth. We want soils that are a little bit more limiting in that regard. If we can find them, and if we can do these other management practices in the vineyard, we can reduce some of this excess vegetative growth. Ultimately, this translates into higher grape quality and ultimately higher wine quality. It also, though, requires that the vineyard management be top-notch. There's very little room for error. You can go overboard in terms of some of these things. You can get into a drought situation, and in those cases, if vineyards have the opportunity to do some irrigation in dry years like 2007, that can be very beneficial. Okay, again, I've touched on a couple different things here. I've skipped over a lot of what I was going to talk about, but just to recap, the principal challenges that we've had in this area will continue. Winter cold injury has been one limitation, and has partly defined what varieties have been able to grow here and which ones have not. One thing that we have seen in the last, say, 12 years or so has been a gradually increasing winter temperatures. It is part of of a general trend of climate change, no doubt. One of the benefits of that, though, to our industry is that we can now consistently grow some varieties that 20 years ago we had a hard time keeping alive from one year to the next. So we're growing more cool tender varieties today than what we had opportunities to grow 20, 25 years ago. Growing season challenges remain high heat in a lot of areas, that is a high growing season temperature, as well as high precipitation patterns. Growers have combated or at least adapted to the growing season temperature to some extent by often locating vineyards in cooler regions of both Maryland and Virginia. You've seen really more of a focusing on, for example, in Virginia, in the western part of the states, and of course our state, and also at higher elevations. There is a decrease in temperature as you go higher. I think most of you have probably experienced that to some extent. And grapes that are growing at 3,000 feet above sea level are going to have a cooler growing season regime than those that are growing at sea level. I think with that, I'll stop and turn it over to our other speakers here to give them a little bit of time on the panel. Kevin, or do we want to hear maybe from the grape growing standpoint first, or wine growing? Ed, do you want to add?
Sure. My name is Greg Lambrecht, Serpent Ridge Vineyard up in Carroll County, Maryland. Great points about terroir, but terroir has always been an argumentative point, whether it be the climate, the soil, the natural area, the elevation, the minerality, what else. But there's also a discussion of, in certain areas, and we see this throughout Europe and even France, there's a certain winemaking style as well that is true to that area that comes through in that style of winemaking. Read an interesting article on terroir, and they talked about Burgundy, and when they look at a grape, they look at, it's not a Pinot Noir produced in Burgundy, it's a Burgundian wine that just happens to be Pinot Noir. And that's the way they kind of look at it over there. So, we've seen, I think, unfortunately, as a nation, we've seen kind of a diversion from terroir, especially when we see some of the, on our western coast, we see some of the use of overripened fruit, a lot of use of oak, things that happen in the winery, not necessarily as a wine grower, but as a winemaker, and we see that shift. I think what we have the opportunity to do here in the Virginia and Maryland area is to grow grapes with a lot of the actual character coming out of those grapes, and not necessarily hidden behind some of our challenge where we're never going to over-ripen fruit or in our normal growing season. So we get actually more of the varietal character in those fruit, and we'll start to see that more and more. So just a great point on wine growing, that I think we have that opportunity here to grow nice, especially in our red wines. We can grow beautiful, earthy, wonderful varietal-specific wines here. One of the things I hope that we start to see more and more in the Virginia and Maryland area. We already see them now, and I'd like to see more and more of that. People recognizing this area for that type of terroir.